All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our Q&A. We want this to be a practical time. We've started thinking about the role of sending in terms of the biblical foundation of it, and then a little bit of Bethlehem's history. And so now we want to think about the role of a sending church, a missions agency, and a local church on the field. What role do they play in the life and ministry of a missionary? And so as we think about that, we're going to just broach a variety of topics. They're going to broach, I'm going to ask them questions, and they're going to give us some insights in terms of what this looks like. And I think when we think about sending, it always starts with that person who comes up to you after the service. Darren, they heard you preach, or Nick, they know you're the missions pastor. Oh, first, before we do that, you've got to introduce yourselves. Come on. All right. Tom, you've met Tom. Darren, you kind of introduced yourself.
I'm Darren Carlson. I'm a lead pastor of a church in Bozeman, Montana, and I am the founder of Training Leaders International.
I'm John Hoagland. I'm professor for global studies and theology at Bethlehem College and Seminary, and then also served as a global partner with Training Leaders International in Vietnam.
I'm Nick Whitehead. I'm the pastor for global outreach at the North Church. I was a MDiv graduate from Bethlehem College and Seminary a few years ago. And I'll just say this to tag off of what Tom was just saying, if you're at a small local church, the impact you can have on missions. I thought of this as you were talking. My dad is here with me at the pastor's conference. He was a missionary pilot for MAF for 25 plus years in Latin America. And he just told me as he was retiring, he went back to some of the small local churches that supported him. And he counted up all the money that his home church had given him over the years and was able to report to them. You guys, town of 200 people in north central Iowa, you guys supported me at $600,000 over the course of my career. So just you can have a disproportionate impact through your faithful giving. But that's my claim to fame as my dad. I'm just a second generation missionary kid. So.
Very good. Well, good. I started to ask, I'll come back to it. Darren and Nick, either of you can share, actually any of you can share, but you guys, you get done with the service, somebody comes up to you, young person, and says, I think God's calling me to missions. What do you say? How do you help guide them? What are the things that you're helping them think through?
Go ahead. I'll go second. I'm going to fix whatever you...
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. That's a good way. That's good. Let's keep doing that. One thing I would ask them is, just very simply, what is motivating you? Why do you feel called? And obviously, there's going to be a period of listening there. If I'm hearing something, an existential experience, like a vision or dream, we can talk about that. A lot of people, that I've talked to say, I want to go to Japan because I watch a lot of anime. Sometimes, I've heard, here's this ambition for some real need, resolving human trafficking issues or poverty. And those things can all be good things that the Lord may use and orchestrate. But what I'm really listening for is their word-wrought ambition. Is there a calling on your life where Scripture has just infiltrated your heart and mind, where you can't get these things? You're citing Paul in Romans 10, quoting Isaiah 52. In Romans 15, he quotes Isaiah again when he's talking about, I have this ambition to lay a foundation where it's not been laid. And then he quotes Old Testament. Paul's just living in the Word of God, in the Bible, and that's what's motivating and driving him. So that's often what I'm listening for. But then I'll just add one more thing. I think one thing I often ask people, they say, what's my next step? Where do I go from here? Do I take a vision trip? Do I go talk to some missionaries? And depending on where they're at, often my response is, I think your next step is just to be a really faithful member of this local church and serve here and use your gifts and grow. And a lot of people don't like hearing that, but I think that is often the first step.
I don't have anything to say. I would just say two things. One, do not demean their naive calling into missions. I've never had a young person come up to me with a fully formed theology of missions and give me good reasons why they're going, but they still want to go. And so you want to nurture that in them, not judge them in everything they're wrong about. And if you do that, you become a welcoming place. Our church is across the street from a university, and so there's a couple hundred students hanging around, and they are interested in missions. And we had a couple years ago, I don't know why I did this, but I actually did like a missions altar call, and we had like 100 people. And the mistake is that we weren't ready for it. And so everyone's like, I want to go in the missions. Well, you take 30% and you go, no, you're not the kind of people we want to send. But now, okay, you've got 50 to 70, and you actually can't do anything about it. And so that's a problem. So even if they say come and they say, what do you want to do? Well, if you don't have a plan, then you're not going to be able to be helpful. Our plan right now is to say, go take the perspectives class and join our church and go be a good college student. And, or, if they've a mature believer, and we had this happen with someone, they're like, I'm going to Jordan, and they went on one trip, and it's just, they're going to Jordan now full time. And so take the perspectives class. And once they took the perspectives class, then we're not big enough for a nurture program, but we do have the gifts within the local church to prepare these people. And so those are the next steps. So don't demean them, even though it's all very naive. And then have a plan, even if, our church is smaller in Bethlehem. And because of that, we only have X amount of money, and we have to have a plan so that they can go.
Great.
Yeah. Can I have one thought on that? I think for students that I talk to, one of the first things I want to communicate to them is that if by God's grace you sort of launch into full-time cross-cultural ministry someday, anywhere in the world, when you land, people will consider you to be spiritually mature and a leader in the church in some way. And so how are you going to get there? Like, are you going to be able to live up to that expectation whenever you arrive, wherever it is you may be going? And so that helps set the trajectory for spiritual maturity, emotional resiliency, perspectives, or other forms of study. But to say you will be seen in a certain way as someone sent out from a church. So let's get you there. That's a direction I'm headed.
Yeah, because if you don't have a plan, what ends up happening is you send out a lot of people, and they're all back within a year or two because they're not emotionally resilient or capable of staying. And so you could actually have missions that are giving a lot of money to missions, but it's people who are just rotating out constantly because you actually haven't prepared them. So you feel good as a sender. We're sending lots of people, but you're really just setting people up for failure over and over. It's just it feels good on the sender side, but you're not actually getting anything done.
Tom, I've got a follow-up from somebody who submitted a question. They said, we were encouraged by your story that young people pushed for a missions movement at Bethlehem. How do young people steward their gospel ambition while submitting to elders in a church who don't have the same zeal?
That's a great question. And I try to think of the earliest time at Bethlehem, before we were becoming established in missions. I think if a young person comes in, and they can also be judging, just like the pastors can judge them. They can judge the pastors and judge the leadership. They don't know much about missions. Their heart's not on fire for missions and so forth. But I think as a missions-minded person, what I encourage them to do is to be like secret agents in the church, and just that you're here for a purpose. I mean, I like what Nick said about, one of the best first steps is just to be really fully engaged in the local church. And not as someone that's shaking their finger at everybody that's not missions-minded like they are, but to say, just come in and serve and love the people and get to know the people. Don't use the people so they can get on your prayer list later on. I mean, just be good church members, and but at the same time be secret agents. And just when you're in a Sunday school class, I mean, the way you answer questions or the way you lead a ministry can show a missions awareness that stimulates others, and so I agree with Darren, is just to welcome that enthusiasm, and but just to find creative ways to unleash them in the life of the church. So.
Any other observations from you? John, you're a seminary prof. You probably get some of your mission students maybe who are eager and ready to go. And how do you encourage?
Well, two things. One, I don't think it's a requirement that you be sent out from the church where you grew up, right? I mean, there could be times and places in which a church change is needed, taking all into consideration everything that Tom just said. My own story, actually, I was a part of a church that in graduate school that had a tradition of only sending missionaries who were already elders in the church, and only for certain types of church planting through a particular organization. And so my wife and I were 24 and saying, oh no, this is where we want to head. Like, we've got to plan some ideas. And it took a bit for the elders to kind of come around and say, maybe we need to open our eyes a little bit wider about what God may be doing. And I do trust that by just participating in the life of the church, being at things that are happening, and having people start to slightly be blessed by your leading a small group or teaching a Sunday school class, that sort of opens opportunities for how the Lord may be at work in a church.
I'll just say super quick, the biggest disruptors and movers in missions have been young people who haven't followed the rules of find a sending church. And I'm not saying that you should definitely find a sending church, but the Haystack Revival was 5 college students. Hudson Taylor got frustrated, and he went outside the churches and started pulling people that the churches, because the churches were so inept in sending missions, that they went around the churches and went just to the university fellowships. And so I agree. I believe Scripture prescribes a way. But I also believe the disruptors are sometimes necessary. I mean, I started Training Leaders International as a ministry of Bethlehem Baptist Church, and I wasn't a member of the church. And there was a huge debate about whether this should be allowed. And Pastor John just said, just let it happen. Just let it happen. And I wasn't a member. I wasn't a missionary. I wasn't supported by the church. But I had Tom. And because I had Tom, I had John. And that's pretty much how it happened. Did it follow the rules? It did not. Did I have a lot of ambition? I did. Had I ever been overseas? I had not. Sometimes it just happens. There's just disruptors that don't follow the rules, and it's okay. You have a mic.
I have a mic, thank you. And I encourage you to read a mission biography called Breakout. And he will go against everything we say this morning in terms of proper procedures. He just went down, was it to Columbia? I can't remember where he went, but didn't follow any rules. And I am not lifting that up. That's what they should do, but it shows that God is big enough that he can even use something like that. And maybe what the lesson for that is that it's not like any of us are going to do this perfectly. So we do the best we can as leaders. Young people follow the Lord as best they can, and there will be failures along the way, unfortunately, but that will happen. But there will be amazing, surprising successes. And so I would love to find the Bruchkos that have a passion to see the lost reached. So.
Speaking of disruptors, Darren, how does a missions organization, like one you started, that sends out long-term missionaries, how does a missions organization honor the role of a local church?
The local church should be doing all the care, unless it gets professional. I think that most churches can do the basic triage of care, the basic care of the family. Lay people often have a better impact on people than professional counselors, but then there can be people who spend all their time thinking about cross-cultural issues and teaching and how to relate and the problems that come from living in another culture. And those are professionals that God has gifted to the church to help these people that you might say, we're going to engage, but we don't understand why this marriage is on the rocks or something. And so you said you can have Barnabas' team. If they're into the financial straits, the mission agency, will have some money, but typically it's the local churches like, we're dropping 10 grand to get them home right now because, they're in a closed country and they need to leave immediately and they're going to lose all their possessions. And then when they come back, it's not the missions agency's job to help them. It's the local church's job. So if you send them, you better be ready to receive them back, and not just be like, oh, we're just too busy to help you. Welcome back to the U.S. Where are you going to stay? I don't know. So the mission agency is the professionalization of missions to help with very specific tasks of logistics and travel and visas and relationships and partnerships and to expand your network and all those and then counseling and post-counseling and pre-trip stuff. That's all can be professionalized, and people spend their life doing that, and they're very good at it. But then the local church can do the foundation stuff, which is way more important.
How have any of you, and this is for any of you, you can follow up with that. How have you seen that mission agencies do that well in the context of a local church, coming alongside a missionary?
You probably have lots of examples.
Just a simple example. I in both mission agencies that we served with while serving overseas, we always had a representative from the agency there at our commissioning as a way to say the church commissions you, but in a sense your manager in this sort of role is going to be this agency and the particular structures that are going to lead you there. I always felt that was a wonderful gesture and a way to say, hey, we are joined in this in some way.
Yeah, there's, I can think of the negative examples and the positive examples.
You can give negative examples.
We have, at North, we have 35 units or something like that we serve as a sending church for. And I think there's 20 different agencies represented or something like that. So there are some that really, I think, lean into our role as a sending church. And then there's other agencies that really aren't paying attention to that. So when a crisis happens, some agencies are fully we have to take care of this. Other agencies are looking to us. I had a situation recently where they were like, whatever you guys want to do, that's what we want to help facilitate. And that was really helpful for us. Now, I think it really depends on the church, what you're looking for in an agency. So like us, we have a full-time missions pastor. We have a lot of energy going into this. We can take a lot of the load in providing that care. Whereas there's just smaller churches that, you're saying, I'm a solo pastor, I've got one associate. We can't fully dive into all the complexities of caring for this particular case. And in that circumstance, it's really helpful to have an agency that does have a healthy member care system and is able to take on some of those things. So I think it is contextual, I guess.
And you should be careful about clearinghouse mission agencies. If you guys ever have a missionary that says, I don't like that admin fee that they're taking, so I'm going to go to this place that takes 3% and they just do my finances, that is a terrible idea. And because they're just a clearinghouse for your donations and you have no other support. And it's typically people from small churches or people who are self-sending. And they want to go overseas somewhere, and then they have there's nothing behind them to help them, and they just struggle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they just struggle.
Mm-hmm. We've been talking about sending churches, but what is a sending church? What do we mean by sending church? Nobody wants to answer.
I can. I already thank you. I already shared some while I was telling the story, but I mean, what we've really tried to think about is a holistic kind of sending, where it is. I mean, finances are so important; they really are, and so whatever we can do to support our missionaries financially is a great blessing. But the hands-on emotional connectedness is so important as well. And that's where the Barnabas teams, I think, have been so helpful. And like I said, David Livingston and Brad's not in here right now, but we've been doing that right from the beginning. That's probably one of our most important things. And sometimes it works well, and the missionaries, the Barnabas teams really come around, and sometimes they kind of dwindle or fall apart. And but for the ones that it works well, it's really significant. My wife Julie they just officially closed their sending or their Barnabas team for a couple that served in Senegal, I think, or Sierra Leone, Senegal for 20 years or so, and just every week, not every week, every month they called them, especially once Zoom came into play. I mean, and that was a really important thing. And so when they come back, they help them get resettled and help their kids. We also see it with kids, because it's not just the parents that are struggling to go from back and forth. It's the kids. They're saying goodbye to friends, and then they come back in. No one knows them anymore. Their friends have gone on and changed a lot, and so just that real personal touch. We have Sunday school classes and that will write letters to the missionary kids, and that means more than you realize. So, like even for me, first time I went to Cameroon was back in 1990, and we had a Barnabas team, and one of the guys on the Barnabas team was the sports person. So he made it his goal to keep me posted on how the twins were doing. And 1990? Yeah, in 1990 it was great because the twins they had their normal horrible start, and he was kind of consoling me. And then, but the mail back in those days didn't have email. Back in those days it was 3 weeks at best. They send something, I get it, and then I send it back to them. So it's a 6-week turnaround. And but by the time I left the field on my way back, we stopped in England, and I got a USA Today, and I found out the Twins had just won 15 in a row. And so my whole life was changed. And so.
Well, we've got a couple. Oh, Nick, are you going to? John, go ahead.
Yeah, just that if your missions committee doesn't have the distinction between a sending church and a supporting church.
I just was going to.
You're going to probe for that?
I was going to probe.
I found that so helpful for our own ministry and for other churches to identify who of the missionaries you support consider you to be their primary church as their sending church. And again, accountability is key here. If there's a problem, which pastor do they call? And if it's you, well, then you're their sending church. And if you're not, you're a supporting church. And it was so helpful as a long-term cross-cultural missionary to be able to say to churches, I am so thankful for your support of our ministry, so that we are most carefully accountable to this particular church that is our sending church. And by God's grace, if that church can also say, we will actually be a significant supporter of yours, right? So that you say, hey, there's support here, there's actually resources here put at your disposal. We've affirmed your ministry. We believe in what you're doing. That sends the confidence of your cross-cultural worker just another exponential degree higher, and grants a freedom in ministry that I think is really crucial. So that distinction between sending and supporting church, to me, is really crucial, both for the missionary and then for the local church.
We've got a couple of follow-up questions that have come in on Barnabas teams. So any of you can answer it, but how can we go about starting Barnabas teams when we currently lack that structure for all our units? How do you start them?
That's a good question. I won't get the microphone from you. I think you can just start one at a time, where it's not like sometimes everything becomes program oriented, and you just can't get a whole program launched. But you can say, let's this mission area is really under pressure right now, and we'd love to gather a group of 6 to 8 to 10 people that want to specifically commit to that. And even if you're not starting a program, it's okay, now we've got to do it for everybody, because not everyone will feel the same sense of need as some do. Some will just thrive on that. Others, it'll be one more form of accountability. Maybe they'll ask me to write some kind of annual review, and that's not what they need. And so I would say just start small, and then I think it will grow, because it really is effective, I believe.
When I was working at Bethlehem, and I'm sure this was just taking the cue from things that Tom had set up, but we required those who were being sent out to launch with a Barnabas team from the church. I think that served multiple roles in that it was providing the accountability just to the elders, in the sense of saying, other people know these people in the life of the church so much so that they're willing to join a team like this. And really, it's those relationships that you build in the context of the church when you're there for a more extended period of time that are going to stand the test of time for, multiple decades sometimes. I think of some of our missionaries at the North Church now, and the people that know them best are these people that have they've been riding this out for 3 decades, some of them, 20 years playing a role in a Barnabas team like this, receiving them back in, sending packages, doing all of these just little cares for their people. And so I really think it is leveraging, if you have small groups in your church, I think that's a great way to say, what small group was the missionary in before they were launched, and can that small group just now take up this ownership of this new team? So
I think an important piece is that it's not a program where we just artificially choose 8 people for every missionary, make it happen. But the burden is on the missionary to recruit his or her support team. And
So what does that look like? So what actions would a typical Barnabas team take after starting, in terms of how often they want to be in contact with a missionary, especially if it's a supporting church, maybe, rather than a sending church? What does that look like? What could it look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it could be overwhelming if every supporting church felt they needed to provide a Barnabas team that expected regular communications and so forth. Although that would be, in a sense, a nice problem to have, because it's usually not that way. But I think one Barnabas team is sufficient for a missionary to thrive. And then maybe in the supporting churches, there's just a way of getting in contact. Like, I have one supporting church where the pastors, they call me every 2 or 3 months. And we set it up and we talk, and I really appreciate that. It doesn't take them a lot of time, but boy, it makes me feel connected to them as a supporting church. Whereas the Barnabas team, my Barnabas team is going to meet this Thursday, and it's very intentional, and it's just an hour meeting a month, or an hour meeting, maybe every 3 or 4 months even. It doesn't have to be all the time, but if something happens, I can call them at a moment's notice, and they'll pray for me, and they'll mobilize prayer and all those kinds of things, and so.
Maybe let's shift it the other direction. John, as a missionary, what should be the expectations, or what do you hope for from a sending church? How are they involved? What should you expect from them in terms of their involvement and investment?
And each missionary is going to approach that in their own particular way. We were blessed to have a sending church that cared for us, and I think that's a really big part of this, right? To find a church that says, "Hey, we are excited about what you are doing, and we want to be long-term committed to it." That's your definition of a sending church. I found our ascending church to be a place where I could open up about even our decision-making processes. And so it brought me great freedom on a number of occasions to talk to the missions pastor, and then him even say, "You know what, I'd like to bring this up with the elders of the church," and just say, the Hoaglands are at a point of making a decision about where to locate or about which ministry to pursue. Here's what they're thinking. Does that sound good to you all? And I don't think we proposed anything so radical that it was going to get vetoed by the elder board, but there was a sense of confirmation that said, hey, there are some other people who know the thought process we went through in making this decision, and they're on board with us. And so for us, the accountability or the availability of a church pastoral staff to say, hey, we want to walk with you through these decisions was really crucial, I think, to our own work in ministry.
Great. Maybe on the reverse side, Nick, as a sending church, what expectations should the sending church have for the missionary? What do you at the North Church look for from your missionaries?
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge piece, and by God's grace, in the technological age that we live in, is communication. Like, regular communication is extremely helpful in just staying connected to our workers, and so that is an expectation we have, whether that's via newsletters. But I think especially helpful for me, just as a missions leader, and even for our elders, is to get more like direct personal connection with them, not just a newsletter that's sort of mass sent, but at times just being filled in sort of behind the scenes on what's going on. And so obviously that's an expectation they ought to have for us as well, is that we would be regularly communicating with them. And I think another thing that's just increasingly I find to be helpful is let's just talk about the hard things, like, and even the differences that we might have. Like, our missionaries are overseas for sometimes decades, and culture is changing in America. Things are happening here, and all sorts of debates and conflicts, and sometimes our missionaries are not really tuned in to what's going on, and so they come back to a different world. And so it's just really good when you're creating a relationship of trust where you're able to have hard conversations, and you're inviting even your workers into, like, have you changed on any major theological convictions? Like, let's just have those conversations and walk through those things as we think about partnership. So fostering and developing trust, I think, has been important.
And please don't cut the missionaries that have been a part of your church for 20 years because you're new and you want to do a new missions thing. Like just stick with them until they're done, and stay in your pastorate forever, so that when you decide, well, we're going to do something different, and you just don't renew them, even if no one knows who they are, you're the church that sent them. It's a hobby horse.
I'm going to follow up a little bit. This is another question submitted, and I think it's a good one to wrestle with. And hard things, right? How should the church biblically and compassionately receive missionaries who return from the field feeling like they've failed? What practical steps can be taken to restore, encourage, and reintegrate them into the local church community? I think, a little bit, even what you were saying, Nick, in terms of culture change. How do you help missionaries returning from the field, especially when it's ended in a rough way, maybe?
Yeah, and I'm the sort of problematic return from the field. I can't speak precisely that, Dwayne, but just to get on the table, the first part of that, it was so encouraging to walk into a church and have a member of the church say, oh, we know who you are. The pastors mentioned you before, right? Or something like that to let you know you are not just a picture on the wall. You have not just been forgotten, but somebody in this church has made a point of saying, hey, you know what? We're praying for you. We're doing so publicly, and so that sort of thing is just so huge for helping missionaries return. I mean, we did return from overseas ministry recently, so 2.5 years ago, and I mean, I'll just really be honest. Some of those helping people refurnish their house might be a really helpful way to help people who come back from living overseas. Some of those ways in which we, as living in our own country, sort of grow settled in all the things that are around us and the relationships that we have, and no matter what you do, that furniture is gone when you decide to serve overseas. And so when in coming back, and so I'll make it both physical and spiritual here, the resetting of both physical and spiritual furniture for people returning to the United States is huge. And so on the relational side, recognizing that those relationships that they had 10 years ago when they went out are not the same as they used to be, and leaning into that by saying, hey, we want to help you build new relationships here. We'll introduce you to this particular small group, or come join ours. Let's not act like everything is just as it was 10 years ago, but let's start afresh with rebuilding all the sorts of relationships and everything else that goes along with that. And so then on the flip side too, they have literal needs for things like furniture too, so help them out with that. Great.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like, especially if it's a situation in which there's despair, or there's a feeling of failure, or there's a premature departure from the field, I think it's just preaching what we preach to our people. It's big God theology. We have a sovereign God. He's not done with you. Your identity is in Christ. It's not bound up in this missionary experience. So these are just things I think pastors are equipped to do and climb into those experiences through good listening. But then I would also say it is helpful. You know, I'm approaching this circumstance at the North Church where a lot of the global partners we are partnering with will be retiring soon. And what does it look like to care for them past the time of them, no longer being formally sent out by an agency? They're not formal workers anymore, and yet they're trying to reinculturate. They're trying to get connected again to the church. So how do we continue our care past just the season of sort of formal partnership and begin to care for them again as members who have sort of unique needs as they're trying to climb back into life in the U.S.?
And if you are coming from a church that really does value the idea of reaching those unreached peoples, there's a reason they're unreached. They're hard to reach. And so, we've had missionary couples that have given 20 years and have maybe seen one convert. One convert in 20 years. That's not very. If you're a business person, you say, well, that's not very helpful. But I really believe in the sowing seeds, and that their labor has not been in vain in the Lord, even as Paul says. I think of the Quichua Indians in Ecuador, that I heard that there had been missionaries working among them for 50 years before there was any kind of response to the gospel. And now you go into this part of Ecuador, and there are Quichua churches all over. And so I do think to trust in the sovereignty of God, never to excuse shoddy work, but to just encourage faithful work, and that God He wants us to be faithful, whether we will see the kind of fruit that we dream about or that we read about in that missionary biography. That's His doing, and so if we can help people rest in the sovereignty of God, that's a big part.
So a pastor says, I love I hear you guys talk about missions. You guys love missions. I've got lots of responsibilities. Think of a solo pastor who's got all kinds of things on his plate. Think of a large church pastor who has lots of administrative responsibilities, mainly maybe in connection to leading the staff. It says, I just can't be involved in missions. How do you respond to that, and how do you help a pastor think about his role in missions in the context of a local church?
You need to go overseas. You need
And
to
there's
not.
this organization.
There's
called,
this
no, I'm just
organization
kidding.
called Training Leaders International. I mean, so I did TLI. When did we? 2009. So I've been doing it for a little while, and boy, there's a lot of excuses of I can't go overseas and because I'm too busy. Listen, if you plan to do missions, it will happen, and if you are just passive and say you're too busy, it will not happen. If you tell your elder board, I want to go and teach twice a year, and maybe that's the start. Or I want to teach once a year, and you got to have a spouse that is able to handle it at home, and then that's what you do. And then you have the church rally to help your family while you're gone. If you plan, it will happen. If you don't plan, it will not happen. It's just how it is. And gosh, I just remember so many people making so many excuses about why they couldn't travel, and some of them were legit. And I've been able to not travel for a while because of legit reasons. But man, a lot of them are excuses. You're as busy as you want to be, and if you want to do missions, you'll do it. You'll do it.
If I can just
Say that nicer than I said.
Yeah,
We turn to
fix what he
Pastor
said.
Tom now.
No, but it's been exciting for me. Here I am, 70 years old, and at 65 I was commissioned after my 40 years at Bethlehem, and what I found with TLI, and this would be true for other agencies too, but for pastors especially, it's just such a wonderful opportunity to be able to go, and you often will go with a TLI staff person maybe, or maybe a seminary student or whatever. You'll go as a small team, and the joy of taking the treasure that you have preached for years, that you have just loved, and be able to give it to someone else. There's nothing like that. And you don't have to be an old pastor either. Although I think TLI there's a lot of wonderful older pastors that are serving in TLI, and it's like they've got another chapter of ministry life that maybe they didn't even anticipate. But it's. I mean, I look at myself. I could have stayed at Bethlehem. I don't think they would have kicked me out, and just kind of ridden into the sunset, and that can be a beautiful thing too. I mean, to serve and die in the pulpit. That can be a beautiful thing.
Not for your church.
No, it's a little traumatic. That's when you need the professional counseling to come in. But so there's something beautiful about that. But there's also sometimes you wonder, I'm kind of coasting now, and I don't feel like I was coasting at Bethlehem. I was giving it my all, but I just had a sense that a change was coming. And my wife, bless her heart, just said one day, she said, Tom, I think you're going to have a chapter in TLI. And I thought, maybe. And it's been a wonderful chapter.
Well, you had a chapter from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And he was a board member until he joined our staff, so he has been involved throughout. We got a question submitted. We're looking to start missions at our young church. We want to begin by teaching the reason and command for missions, but when it comes to actually sending and going to the nations, where do we begin?
you're so lucky to just start something and not have to deal with the missions committee that already exists.
That's the next question.
So give thanks to God. Number one, pick the priorities. If you want to do unreached, I mean, you can pick it: theological education, unreached people groups, and mercy and justice in undeveloped area. You pick whatever your categories are. These are the categories we're going to do. And then you're going to go find partners. You're going to say, and here are the partners we're going to work with. And then you're going to do vision trips with those organizations. And then you're going to launch your thing. So you could say, okay, we're going to do refugee work. We want to send a missionary to that. And that missionary is going to work with a partner we know. And then we're going to start sending teams to get the congregation involved in missions in some way, so that their heart for the nations gets bigger. And then it becomes this cycle of raising up more people, not just short term, but long term. And then people are giving to missions because they're engaged. And so pick the categories you want to serve in, pick the partners. And because if you're a young church, you get to pick them. Bring some people along with you, so it's not dictatorship and missions. And then just start going.
One thing to consider too, as a pastor, is you don't have to do this all the time, but go to a big missions conference. When I first was converted, one of the first things I did was I went to what was called ACMC, back in those, the Association of Church and Mission Committees, and just a big conference, but it had all these representatives, like the booths and those kinds of things, and that gave me a bigger picture. Or I went to Urbana. I brought a group of students down to Urbana, and just, again, it's not only the experience of the corporate times, but it's just all these relationships that you can develop by meeting people. And so I think that's something you could do real soon, is go to some kind of a missions conference. I just came back from a missions conference in Louisville called Missions Nexus. And it's just the, I don't know, the Walmart, I mean, it's got every different mission agency represented. You just see the creativity that's going on, and it's a big world. The missions world is a big world, and so.
And Tom may have won the Lifetime Achievement Award at that missions conference. Yeah.
All right, the other side. So you come to a church that's an existing church, and they have a missions plan. They have missionaries they support. How do you process all that as a new pastor? What should you be thinking about? What should you do? What shouldn't you do? Darren's already said one thing you shouldn't do. How do you help walk through that process as a new pastor?
I just did this, and the answer is you don't change anything. And you don't cut any missionaries. And you are upfront about your dreams and desires and missions when you interview, and you even make deals like, I would like to travel twice a year to do X. It's part of my heart. Or I would like to be involved in missions in this way. So you say that up front. And if you want to change things, you need to actually know those people, which takes 4 years. So I would do nothing for 4 years except meet the missionaries, talk to the people, encourage them. I would guess if you're going to a church that has a missions committee, you're a solo pastor, they've got 20 missionaries at $100 a month, most likely. And you might have some thoughts about that. So I would say wait, get to know the people, do a few funerals, love the families, and then bring to bear your plans. But be upfront about them too.
Great.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Darren, can I ask you a question? Back to the younger church, you're setting a missions vision, and you're saying, get your priorities straight, then sort of recruit or build interest in that. Now, is that different than saying, look around your church, see what people are interested in, and say, oh, maybe I can foster that, help that, support that. When I'm curious, if you as a church set really strong priorities, do you risk sort of cutting off maybe what God's doing in the life of people in your church?
Yeah, hopefully you know the people of your church, and hopefully you're preaching towards something. So if unreached people groups on your list, you have the power of the pulpit, and you preach on that and draw people into that. I'm guessing half your church has never heard of an unreached people group, and even if they're in a great missions church, 25 to 50% probably couldn't tell you what that is. And so draw that out of them. And if your heart's on refugees, that's where mine is, and in theological education, then talk about it a lot. And then you'll find that the congregation is in tune to it.
Nick, as a missions pastor, is another question that came in. How do you decide who to send when budget is low and there are many candidates? You just ask for more money. No.
I think with all of this, it's balanced by we are finite, and I think churches need to recognize that. We're finite in the resources we have, we're finite in the people we have. And I mean, it goes back to what Darren was just saying. You both have to recognize who are the people God has given to us, what are the resources God has given to us, and what are the priorities we're seeing from Scripture that are compelling us, especially, I think, among the elders. And so, I mean, just for an example, in the North Church, we've been in a reassessing what are we going to do as a church as we move forward into the future in missions. And we're not cutting everybody, Darren. But we are trying to think strategically through what does it look like to care well for those people who are already out in the field while trying to aim towards something that we feel the Scripture is compelling us to. And a lot of times it means saying we're prioritizing these things, and that doesn't mean these things are not good or they're not important for people to do. We're just saying we're compelled by these things. So in particular, church planting and church strengthening, kind of contextual to our church, we both feel this need to be involved in local church work, particularly among planting churches among the unreached and unevangelized. But we also see ourselves as kind of a theological flagship church. We've got Bethel profs and Northwestern profs and BCS profs as members of our church. We kind of have a high theological education just among our members, and we're saying, we think we have something valuable to contribute globally in that area. So we don't want to cut ourselves off from not doing any work in the global south, like Latin America, parts of Africa and Asia, where there's just a huge need for professor-like training, biblical training, ecclesiological training. So that's kind of just a balance of priority plus what is our context as a local church. So that's coming into play as we think about sending. I don't know if there's a follow-up question on that. But.
No, that's great. That's great. Local churches, we talked about this, have missions committee. What's the role of a missions committee, and how does that relate to the role of the elders in the local church when it comes to missions?
So how I think about it is I often think about a complementarian husband and wife. So I think the Bible sort of has a design for each and a role that they ought to play. And yet that doesn't mean that, for example, a husband is never to be nurturing or tender, though I think God has designed a woman to be that and to help her family in that way. So similarly, I see our missions committee and our elders having different designs, but that doesn't mean they don't overlap at times. But I'll just say the primary ways I see them working well together is the missions committee taking on a care role and the elders taking on a shepherding and theological and accountability sort of overseeing role. And I want both to be paying attention to the other, but I really want to be able to empower our missions committee to just get with those global partners, be able to pray for them, listen to them, love them, encourage them, sit down for long periods of time with them. And I really want to get our elders thinking critically about who are we partnering with? How do we help steer them and guide them in ministry and shepherd them towards alignment or their next ministry objective or step? So they have overlap, but I think that's kind of how we divided it up in our church to give people clear sort of lanes that they're operating in.
Great. Short-term missions. What's the role of short-term missions in the life of the local church? Darren, you can't answer this. No, I'm kidding. Because he wrote an article saying why you should cancel your short-term missions trip.
Except for all the short theological education trips.
Yes.
I believe I did take it from Darren Carlson's article, but just if we switch the name from short-term missions to short-term ministries, we would be halfway to solving most of the problems associated here. So take out the expectation of measurable missiological sort of contextualization happening in short-term sorts of ways, and you might be able to find other ways in which people are enriched. The people who are sending and going are enriched without the massive weight of seeking and then also the sort of halo that comes with the term missions.
Right.
One of the champion short-term missionaries of the Bible, name of Apostle Paul. He would just go and I think in Thessalonica he spent maybe 4 or 5 weeks there, got a church planted. But that's not the norm of what happens.
And they are an example to all.
That's right.
In their faith and conduct.
Yeah, that's right. And so I believe in short-term. Maybe ministries is a better thing. I think it can be can be a blessing. Like that's one of the things our Barnabas team sometimes will go as a short-term trip to encourage the family, and that's really good. Or they might put on a spiritual life week, and then some will go to teach and encourage. Some will go to watch the kids so that the parents can have undistracted worship and send a worship leader along. That's been a really effective short-term ministry that a lot of people in our church have done. So I think there are ways where short-term can be really, really effective. And even in the ones that aren't effective, I think we need to be careful. But at the same time, even the ones that are not effective, like I remember Ralph Winter, I don't know if you know that name, but he's kind of the father of the unreached peoples emphasis. And but he started out. I think he did a little short-term mission trip to Mexico, and that got him ignited, and he changed the world of missions. So short-term ministry and missions can be effective, but don't let it become programmatic. Have it make sense, and what we do at Bethlehem, Brad Nelson, I think, is a master of stimulating short-term trips. But the way he does it is he calls our missionaries and says, is there any way we can come and serve you and your work? And that's where most of our small short-term ministry is. It's initiated on the field, and it makes a difference. So... And don't begin thinking about, well, man, that's going to cost $60,000 to send that short-term trip. Well, even the value of them raising the funds can plant mission seeds in relatives and even unbelievers sometimes. I remember one of our guys, and he wanted to go on a mission trip, and so he sent support letters out, and his brother got one who wasn't a believer, and his brother got an envelope and put all of his receipts of bills and sent them back. Would you pay for my monthly bills? And it wasn't the exact kind of response you want to receive, and that's how some people think about it. But much more often than not, I think it plants seeds of missions interest in people.
We'll finish with a couple last questions. One is a practical one. How do you approach singles versus family candidates? Is there a push for any and all to go, or is there a distinction in your sending process? So maybe this is more for you, Darren, but any of you can answer that. Families are often more mature, but also divided in responsibilities, while singles sometimes lack maturity, but have time and energy to devote to the ministry. So how do you think through that process?
Mission agencies typically do not send families with older children. The failure rate is extremely high. The Southern Baptist Convention will not do it at all. I haven't personally seen that work well, where someone with older kids, 12 plus, I just can't. Maybe there's 1 or 2 times God is gracious, but it's a very high failure rate. So the most successful ones are typically young families whose kids are flexible and can move, and singles are greatest. I mean, the greatest mission force right now are single women. That's what the majority of missionaries are, and they're a powerhouse. And so, I mean, even as I think of the most competent Muslim missionaries that I know, I think they're all single women. Yeah, I think it's great.
Any others?
Would Bethlehem send a family older kids?
North Church.
North Church.
To me, it's so case by case.
Yeah.
I think you make sure you're aware of the failure rate, and then you ask questions in relation to that. We don't have that problem right now. A lot of times it is younger people without kids, which I think is a good time. I think it's Brooks Buser, someone at Radius, always talks about 25 to 30-year-old window, and we don't want to limit missionaries to that window, but I think that is prime time. Like if you're looking for candidates within your church, like they're old enough to be mature in the faith, growing, you can see visible fruits of their labors, and they're young enough to actually learn a language, understand a culture, be there for a lifetime. So I think that's just wise words, but we don't want to limit it to that. We have people sent out in retirement. We have Tom Steller who are doing faithful work, and God can use that as well.
Yes.
I would say with singles, and this is for everybody, but I think especially for single men and women, like ask the hard questions, like how's purity? Are you looking at pornography? Like let's have those conversations, and do the same for families, obviously. But I think those particular questions are, as you talked about, helping steward people's zeal. It's saying, man, what are some of these sin patterns that we can help you fight now and get you to a place of health and maturity before you go? And don't be afraid and shy away from those.
Great. Here's the big question. How have you seen foreign missions change over the years? And what is the future of missions? He hands it to the missions prof.
Well, that's funny. I was taking that as a cross-cultural missionary myself. I don't know to say how has missions changed in my time period. You can go. You go first. I'll think of something.
I was just at the Lausanne conference. Missions is now Pentecostal dominant, and it's migrant dominant. And it's migrants who identify as missionaries dominant. So there are 15,000 Africans that identify as missionaries in the UK. But they're really migrants who started ministries. And so it's a big change. The places of that were the receivers are the senders, but they're not the senders with financial backing. They're the senders with migratory kind of push. And so you don't get the non-West doesn't have the finances to send the way the West sends, and so it's almost like Moravian missionary sending into selling yourself into slavery or whatever. It's that type of work. So I think the big ones are the Pentecostal movement, Word of Faith movement, the prosperity gospel, popularity globally, and then the migration as missions force that is going on around the world. There's other things going on, but those seem to be dominant right now, wouldn't you think?
As far as Westerners going cross-culturally, like most of the people in your churches would be, the maybe two sort of presuppositions or ideas people have about missions that we need to make sure they see are different in our era than they would be in previous eras. The first one would be missions is urban. We need to get out of our head the idea of the rural. Bring all your civilization with you, and you've got to bring everything with you, except for some very isolated places. Right? There's plenty of isolated places. There's lots of work to be done there, but the people are in urban centers. And so urban would be one. The other one I would say is that in cross-cultural missions, there is no missions in a vacuum in 2025. So every potential disciple, every person who has heard something about Jesus has also heard 10 or 20 odd views about Jesus from, prosperity gospel preachers or from just the random things they're looking up. And so there's a tendency among missionaries to think we need sort of organic, all natural growth in disciples. That is, we don't want to tell them anything. Like, let just you and your Bible, you figure it out. And there's a naivety there that says people are sort of on their own in their Christian walk or in their walk toward Jesus. Maybe they're exploring the faith. And I think the call for us as cross-cultural Western missionaries is to recognize we're speaking into a cacophony of opinions in every culture on the earth. And so clarity about what it is, the way we're reading the Bible, how we're construing what it means to follow Jesus is an essential part of missionary preaching. I
should mention the third one for me is the huge change in leadership in missions, especially among Bible translation. I think all the major heads of Bible translation organizations are African now. And they're not African living in the West, they're Africans living in Africa. And the Africans have sped up the Bible translation work that in the next 10 to 15 years, it could all be done, at least in the New Testament. And there are, I know of one church, for example, that's done 3 translations of people groups in their area. And I can't remember. SIL has a story about this church, and they just 5 people go and they know this language and they do it, and they're locals and they don't need the Westerners' help, and they get it done. And so you're seeing a major shift in Bible translation where all the heads are now non-Westerners, and the Bible translation is primarily being done by non-Westerners now, and the sending of Bible translators, I think, is coming to an end from the West, and it's going to come mostly from regional leadership, not faraway leadership.
I think one of the greatest needs is theological training, and the reason, like say for example in Africa, I just heard just in recent years, last few years or something, they've now been declared to be the most Christianized continent in the world. And but the level of theological training, I mean, the conversions or whatever have just far outstretched the raising up of healthy pastors. And so I think the role of sending people to help with theological education is very strategic. And ideally, they will help start schools there that they will train very responsible biblical interpretation that will color their preaching. Because the prosperity gospel preaching, which was exported from the United States, unfortunately, that has just taken the day. And as I look at it and work with some who come from a prosperity background, I've got a lot more compassion than they did. This is what they've been learned. This is what they taught. This is what they saw on TV. Right. And but what I've met enough Africans who have been prosperity preachers be just so deeply moved and transformed by helping them learn how to read the Bible in context and how to understand the different genres of Scripture. That's what TLI specializes in. And just what did it mean? And can we know that? And then how do we preach it? Because the Bible can be like a wax-shaped nose or whatever. You can just kind of make it shape whatever way you want. But we believe in the author's intended meaning. What did the Apostle Paul mean? What did John mean behind these words? And
Yeah. A lot of Reformed theology is not on TV. We've abandoned TV, right? Like we're doing podcasts and we're doing our own websites, but the theology is being exported on TV, not on podcasts. And maybe we shouldn't have done that, abandoned TV for whatever reason. I don't know.
Neil Postman, for instance.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we will close. I'll close this in prayer in just a minute, but let me say thank you. We're glad that you've taken this time. And our desire is just to see God's name glorified in all the earth, among all the peoples. And so we want to help send well. And that's what we're called to do as God's people, as the church. So let me close in prayer. Father, thank you for this time that we've had together. Thank you for this conference. Lord, may our hearts be stirred and encouraged by the messages we hear over the next days and the conversations that happen and the books that are purchased and all that goes on. Lord, may our hearts be stirred not only for our own ministries, but for the nations and for your glory among every tribe and tongue and language and nation. And so, Lord, help use us to that great end, we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you.